Do you know about COVID-19? Do you know what it cost? Is there any pandemic like this before? What did the pandemics costed the earth before? Do you know that the cholera, bubonic plague, smallpox, and influenza are some of the most brutal killers in human history? And outbreaks of these diseases across international borders are properly defined as pandemic, especially smallpox, which throughout history has killed between 300 to 500 million people. What about COVID-19, the coronavirus? Beginning in December 2019, in the region of Wuhan, China, a new pandemic coronavirus began appearing in human beings. This new virus spreads incredibly quickly between people. Due to its newness, no one on Earth has an immunity to it because no one had it until 2019. While it was initially seen to be an epidemic in China, the virus spread worldwide within months. The world saw more than 500,000 people infected and nearly 30,000 deaths. But do you know the Earth has faced more crucial pandemics in the recent history which caused huge loss of the lives? Exploring Secrets will now tell you the past pandemics in the world history. AIDS pandemic was at its peak, from 2005 to 2012. Killing more than 36 million people since 1981. Currently there are between 31 and 35 million people living with HIV, the vast majority of those are in sub-Saharan Africa, where 5% of the population is infected, roughly 21 million people. As awareness has grown, new treatments have been developed that make HIV far more manageable, and many of those infected go on to lead productive lives. Between 2005 and 2012 the annual global deaths from AIDS dropped from 2.2 million to 1.6 million. Flu pandemic in 1968. Flu pandemic, sometimes referred to as the Hong Kong flu, the 1968 flu pandemic was caused by the strain of the influenza. It took only 17 days before outbreaks of the virus were reported in Singapore and Vietnam, and within 3 months had spread to the Philippines, India, Australia, Europe, and the United States. While the 1968 pandemic had a comparatively low mortality rate, it still resulted in the deaths of more than 1 million people, including 500,000 residents of Hong Kong, approximately 15% of its population at the time. Asian flu from 1956 to 1958. Asian flu was a pandemic outbreak of influenza that originated in China in 1956 and lasted until 1958. In its 2-year spree, Asian flu traveled from the Chinese province of Guizhou to Singapore, Hong Kong, and the United States. Estimates for the death is approximately 2 million deaths, 69,800 of those in the US alone. Flu pandemic. Between 1918 and 1920 a disturbingly deadly outbreak of influenza tore across the globe, infecting over a third of the world's population and ending the lives of 20 to 50 million people. Of the 500 million people infected in the 1918 pandemic, the deaths were 25 million in the first 25 weeks alone. Sixth cholera pandemic from 1910 to 1911. Sixth cholera pandemic originated in India where it killed over 800,000, before spreading to the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and Russia. Flu pandemic from 1889 to 1890. The first cases were observed in May 1889 in 3 separate and distant locations: Bokhara in Central Asia, Turkestan, Athabasca in northwestern Canada, and Greenland. Rapid population growth of the 19th century, specifically in urban areas, only helped the flu spread, and before long the outbreak had spread across the globe. It claimed the lives of over 1 million individuals. Third cholera pandemic from 1852 to 1860. Spreading from the Ganges River Delta before tearing through Asia, Europe, North America, and Africa and ending the lives of over 1 million people, in which 23,000 people died in Great Britain. The Black Death. From 1346 to 1353 an outbreak of the plague ravaged Europe, Africa, and Asia, with an estimated deaths between 75 and 200 million people. The plague most likely jumped continents via the fleas living on the rats that so frequently lived aboard merchant ships. Ports being major urban centers at the time, were the perfect breeding ground for rats and fleas, and thus the insidious bacterium flourished, devastating 3 continents in its wake. Plague of Justinian from 541 AD to 542 AD. Thought to have killed perhaps half the population of Europe, the Plague of Justinian was an outbreak of the bubonic plague, killing up to 25 million people in its year-long reign of terror. Generally regarded as the first recorded incident of the bubonic plague, the Plague of Justinian left its mark on the world, killing up to a quarter of the population of the eastern Mediterranean and devastating the city of Constantinople, where at its height it was killing an estimated 5,000 people per day and eventually resulting in the deaths of 40% of the city's population. Antonine Plague in 165 AD. Also known as the Plague of Galen, the Antonine Plague was an ancient pandemic that affected Asia Minor, Egypt, Greece, and Italy, and is thought to have been either smallpox or measles, though the true cause is still unknown. This unknown disease was brought back to Rome by soldiers returning from Mesopotamia around 165 AD, unknowingly. They had spread a disease which would end up killing over 5 million people and decimating the Roman army. Exploring Secrets wants to tell you that it's not the first time that the Earth is fighting a disease. It already fought great pandemics in the past, so don't panic. Tighten up and fight this bravely. You only have to follow these steps. 1. Stay home as much as you can. 2. Keep a safe distance. 3. Wash hands often. 4. Cover your cough. 5. Sick. Call doctor. Exploring Secrets wants you to be brave, safe and healthy. Comment your ideas for safety. Like, share and subscribe so that you don't miss another explored secret.